Final thing is that whole area of community, because that's part of the same thing, isn't it? More and more people connect to neighbourhood through something they hold in their hand rather than the place they live in. What are you finding out about how the understanding of community is changing? How's that shaping church life? That whole area of, it used to be where you live, that's your community. And it was immediate, evangelise the neighbours on your street. But I think if you said that to 25-year-olds today, they go,
no.
What? What do you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody on my street.
It's a bit like the wonderful difference. So, being a millennial, why would you phone someone?
Yeah.
Why would you ever have to talk to someone on the phone? Whereas you could just send a text message or an email.
Yeah.
So, wonderfully, having just come take over this new pastorate in Barton, Edmunds, within 2 weeks of going there, a dear lady in the congregation, she came up to me and she said two things. She says, number one, your doorbell doesn't work. I said, number two, you don't have an answer phone. And she just looked at me blankly, as if to be like, how can you live without an answer phone? And it never really occurred to me before, but I needed an answer phone because that was how an older generation would want to communicate. Whereas in my mind, I think, well, if I want to get in touch with someone, I'll just WhatsApp them or send them a quick email, and that way we can do things in our own time. But actually, the ways of sort of communicating and talking just actually completely, there's a real generational divide. I mean, the last thing I want to do is speak to my parents on the phone, but I could text.
Yeah.
So can you explain to me what is email? I'm from Suffolk.
I'm from Suffolk as well.
And what are you picking up?
Well, we're a very rural church. I mean, we literally, the church in the middle of a field, so everybody drives to church. And so we tell people your community is where you work, it's where you live, and that's your community, and that's the people that you reach.
Yeah, okay. What about you, Eric? Do people driving in from all over the place?
Yeah, I mean, we have a strange mixture in that we have, obviously, students, a lot of them don't have cars.
Yep.
So they would try and go to a church they can walk to, or a minibus picks them up. So they tend to be quite local. And then we'd have quite a lot of people who travel across Canterbury to get to where we meet. But Canterbury's not very big, so that's not a big thing. And then we would have a lot of people who travel in from the villages outside, because either the village chapel has closed many years ago, or it's not a gospel preaching church.
No.
And so they would travel in. And so we'd have people who, because it's outside of Canterbury, it's actually rural, they would think nothing of driving maybe 15 miles on a Sunday to come to church, because that's actually quite easy. That's 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15
because the roads are empty. And we're very blessed. Where we meet has a 200 space car park, so it's very easy for people to park. But one of the things we're quite passionate about is to not fall into the trap of doing church as if the car hadn't been invented. Which a lot of churches do. People talk nonsense about, we're great to all walk down the street together carrying our Bibles. Well, yes, if it's 150 years ago, but that's just not how communities work nowadays. People do travel.
Yeah.
One of the troubles of doing ministry in London is the way in which everything, particularly for men's communities are not where they live at all.
No.
They will live where their workplaces are. And so you might commute from Wandsworth into central London, but your best mate in your office might live in Chelmsford, and someone else lives over towards Buckinghamshire direction, and you just happen to be as much as a place. And how do we as a church help them to reach those people who are their main community? And that's very hard, because we can't be putting on events at our church to bring in someone from Chelmsford and someone from Buckinghamshire. That just doesn't work. Communities like that just not based on place or neighbourhood as much. What they do tend to be based on, though, particularly in London, we found was they're more based on interests. So I was involved in a local running club as a way of getting to know people, and that was the sort of central passion for a lot of people in their fitness and running and doing that sort of thing. That was a great way to meet people. Or there'd be some people doing a mum's fitness class, or a school gate. Or so one of the ways our church tried to deal with this was to create a community space. So they ran a little coffee shop, which was good for drop-ins for sort of mums and other things, to just try and create sort of interest groups to meet around things. Door to door or kind of immediate neighbourhood. This is like our parish. Just doesn't really fit it.
Yeah, geography works at so many different levels now, doesn't it? You know, you've got the commuters, and you've got children when they're tiny. It's walking distance, but then as soon as they go to school, that might be a couple of miles. Upper school might be 10 miles.
But I guess the pushback on what Eric was saying for us is we are both a network and a neighbourhood church.
That's exactly what's happening. Yeah, you've got two things happening on one side.
And because of where we are, we've got folks who drive in from North Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
Because we're their closest Bible teaching church.
Yeah.
We've got other folks who will drive from different parts of Doncaster. But half of our church is walking distance. And actually they live their life within... They might get the bus to town once a week. But actually their life is lived within. And actually therefore it's... The parish model is partly what we do.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, because I think when you talk to people, they often have an either-or model of church when it's both and.
Absolutely.
You've got the network and the neighbourhood. And we do a whole load of stuff in the neighbourhood and a whole load of people, but then we do a lot of other stuff which is not geographically, as sort of tight, and we find that we have to meshing those things. And occasionally we get people like, the true church or the real church is the neighbourhood bit. And you others are commuters in. You go, no, it's not like that. Church actually is now a both and you just have to live with the reality of both. And certainly in Bedfordshire we found that years ago. There's a whole load of little chapels all around Bedford. And why they're there is because it was too far to walk into Bedford 150 years ago. But now you can get into Bedford in 5 minutes in a car. So these chapels are kind of like, these big churches in Bedford. And you can understand in a way, but they almost try to live in the past. And there are benefits of neighbourhood only. But for a church to these days be neighbourhood only, it's just unrealistic, isn't it? And I found certainly as I've aged, I play sport in Bedford. But at my age, the guys will travel in from about a 15-mile radius. And if they travel in for sport, they will travel into church. My only fear about people who come more than sort of say 10 miles is it's hard for them to get their friends in as it's much easier for people to live locally. But
so we've tried to make we call them growth groups, our home groups. We try to make them a little bit more geographically, so that there is a witness, if you like, within that community. And the idea is that they reach their own communities, and it's worked to a degree. But
I mapped all our members of our church in South London, and the interesting thing was the way in which nearly all of our members lived within half a mile of a main transport route into the city. So we were sort of basically a 3 mile long snake of people along transport route heading straight into the city. East-west reach was virtually non-existent because of the way in which people followed transport lines. So there's virtually no communication out that way, but north-south along transport routes.
I remember Johnny Prime in Enfield saying exactly the same thing. So nearly everybody lives in a very short distance from the church. You can't go sideways, but you can go in and out. And he said, so actually that's why a church in London can be bizarrely more geographically specific than a church like yours or mine, because there isn't that sort of circumference in London. It's quite tight, about.
Although you can go quite a long way, but it's always following the transport lines. It just sort of forces you into one place. Now we're in Bury and Bury St Edmunds, and our church is very much. It's a town centre church. So there are neighbourhood churches in Bury St Edmunds, but ours is with a strong neighbourhood identity. But ours comes from broadly sort of 2/3 of the town, and then probably up to another 10 to 15 miles around the town. But it's got that strong sort of town identity rather than being from sort of one very specific part.
Now yours was very much planted as a neighbourhood church, wasn't it? Tell me the pluses and minuses of that.
Pluses and minuses. When we planted it, there wasn't much change in population. So you'd got a very static population with quite a lot of social issues. That was a challenge for our folks who mostly didn't live in the area at the time we planted. A number of folks have since moved in. So that brought a challenge for them to how do they get to know people. The key for us has been getting involved in the local primary school. Serving as a governor there. I'm at the school gate every morning, every afternoon, picking up my kids and chatting to parents and getting to know them from all sorts of different backgrounds. It brings different challenges as it changes. So now that it's kind of become the school of choice and you've got people coming in from all over the place now, because more middle class parents are more aspirational, they will automatically gravitate to the best school in the area. That brings other challenges in terms of actually getting to know folks, building relationships that are good enough, and then also helping people bridge the class gap. It has been a real challenge actually. I think as a church we are well placed to do that. So we did an event last year, we called it Easter Explorers. It was lovely to see people from all of because it is an estate, but there are effectively 4 different parts and you work your way up. So it's very divided. But actually to see people from all 4 and the new and some folks from outside all there and all chatting together and getting on. So that's part of the challenge for us. And our church shares that demographic. The challenge is just how do you help people who are network folks to engage in mission where they are, but also be part of the neighbourhood mission. Because often, if we don't live in an area, we don't engage in mission.
No, we don't feel.
It'll be one of the things we've found. So how do you help that 50% of the church who don't live in the area to feel part of and be involved in?
Do you put all your eggs in neighbourhood outreach though? I mean, for us, we've had to train people what we call go and tell. That, we train them how to share their faith, even though the people they talk to probably will never end up coming to our church. So we do quite a lot of training in that because we recognise there are a whole load of people, the opportunities God is going to give them are not going to be Bedford based. So we do quite a lot of training, and then say that's absolutely fine because we're actually working for the kingdom, and the kingdom isn't
it's not ours.
Our little church.
No, and that's absolutely right. So we would encourage the same thing. So we've got folks who work in Hull and various other places. I mean, interestingly, what we've seen is those folks actually, one of the ladies who works with this guy turned up at our church, hadn't even told him she was coming. So she drove 45 minutes to come to our church because of what she'd seen in him. And she'd never come across someone who was positive about church.
No.
And she's been since. So she came to a Christmas event, she came a couple of weeks ago. I do wonder if there's something about people come to church with people. And therefore I want to equip people for mission where they are in their workplace. I also want to equip people for mission in their neighbourhood. So we don't do either or. One of our challenges, I think, is always to get to know our neighbours, isn't it? Often we know our workmates better than we know the person that lives next door. So it's not one or the other; it's both and. And actually, I think sometimes our workmates would rather come with us to church because it's safer, even if it means they drive. In which case, great, come over for a day.
That's one of the things I've certainly picked up. We talked a lot about this. Most people become Christians through someone inviting them to something. 9 out of 10 people become Christians that way. And once they start that, it will blow apart some of your neat geography. Because you might meet somebody at the doctor's surgery who lives 3 miles that way, but they would rather come with you this way, to your church than going to a sort of neighbourhood gospel church. And because the relationship's more important than the spatial geography. And over a period of time, say 20 odd years, that will just blow apart the sort of
spreads out.
It blows apart the sort of walk to the local church thing. So it's not just history; it's also that's how people's relationships work. And we say to folks, look, you may have friends who live the other side of town, and there are 4 or 5 gospel churches over there, but actually they want to go where you go because they know and trust you. And if they come to our church for a while and get converted, we aren't immediately going to send them back over there where they live because actually they'll need quite a lot of Christian discipleship before they're mature enough for that. If you just say, oh, you live the other side of Bedford, you better go to one of those churches, they'll drown.
And actually the challenge for us as well, isn't it, is to help those folks engage. So we had a lady come for a while who lived in Haxey in North Lincolnshire, and she had a number of friends who were interested in the gospel, but actually there was a barrier for them coming into Doncaster. So, dead simple, we did a thing called One Big Question, give everyone in church 6 cards, find 6 friends. If God had to answer any question you asked him, what's the question you would ask? And then we compiled it, and we did the main 3 on a Sunday, but actually knowing that this lady had a group in Haxey, we said, right, can you ask the local pub if we can have a room? and we simply did the same thing, but out there on a Thursday evening.
Yeah.
So it's not just simple. We're not just neighbourhood.
No.
We also work with the network. And if that person felt equipped to do it on their own, great, because I don't need another thing to do. You do it, but they wanted help and support, so we would go. So we're not exclusively neighbourhood.
No.
We also want to work with people with their networks.
Well, you were talking about earlier about coming to the point where you want to hand on.
Yeah.
Just talk a little about that whole thing about handing on to, part of our community is not just we're all here together, but time marches on fast, doesn't it? And before we know it, we're having to pass on to a next generation. And how are you preparing your church for that change in its community feel, with you no longer being its main leader, but you're passing? How's that happening for you?
Well, it's incredibly difficult in a sense, because we've been there and involved in that church for over 30 years.
Yeah.
But I think it's a case of loving. If you genuinely love the church rather than loving your position, then you understand that the most important thing is to begin to think, look, you need to be handing on.
Yeah, that's profound. Yeah. And what are the hardest bits you're finding to just that whole idea of like, I've loved this place for so long, and I kind of have to replace that love with another love? Or
I think the hardest thing is the reality that because I've been there for so long, and my wife and I have been there for so long, for somebody else to come in and pastor the church, we can't really be part of it. And it's our church family.
Yeah.
And the prospect of actually having to find somewhere else to worship, even if it's only for a couple of years, is really tough.
Okay. No, I'm with you there. I'm in the same place as you are. It's
Actually, you talk about divisions, in culture and so on. The big division we've got is Norwich and Ipswich supporters.
Yes,
you can't have them in the same church.
No, it really is.
I'm really working to overcome that.
Yeah.
Both teams are doing dismally though.
Look, last week I made the gag at church, that Nazareth was like Norwich. Broad laughter,
right?
Broad acceptance.
Yes,
we've overcome that division by eradicating Norwich fans.
Yes.
Okay. Just one other area of community that I can speak with this colour hair now is clearly that generation of baby boomers is now late 50s, 60s, early 70s. Massive number of people beginning to enter early old age. How are you including them in your church community? How do we make the most of those senior years? Because some of those folks, if they retire around early 60s, they've got quite a few years of active service. How do we empower the young without saying to the old, you're already written off before you're 60 or that's it?
We actually had that very discussion, because when we issued our sort of vision statement a few years ago, we specifically said in it that we would primarily target under 40s in terms of our evangelism, because statistically they were the most unreached, and therefore we would specifically target them. And some of the older people were interpreted that as we weren't interested in older people, which absolutely isn't the case. But neither, for all the reasons we've been saying, can they have all the levers of power. But what they do have a crucial role in is mentoring, discipling, training, equipping, because they would have been through a whole load of life experiences that younger guys like me have perhaps not yet been through. And it's so important to have them able to come alongside the younger people and mentor and disciple. And not all of them particularly keen to do that. I think one of the big challenges I see is quite a worldly mentality in terms of how you approach retirement.
Right.
And I think it was John Piper wrote about this, about the danger of seeing retirement as your goal rather than heaven.
Yes.
And this thing of, I'm retired now, so I don't have to do anything much in the church. I'm just going to consume. I've retired. I've done my bit. And confusing retiring from work from retiring from service to God, which you don't do till He calls you home. And I think not just at our church, in case any of our people are watching this, not just at our church, but I've seen that mentality quite a lot of, I'm retired now, as if therefore I'm just going to enjoy the rest of my life quite selfishly and wait for heaven. I think that's quite a disturbing trend.
So how do you overcome that? Do you sort of envision them and...
I think envision them. I think sometimes direct challenge and say, look, actually, that's worldly thinking. We don't see that we retire from God's service ever. and just try and keep a culture of continual service for God.
That's funny. Mark Lawrence at the FIEC Leaders Conference back in November, he mentioned in one of his seminars that and this is caricaturing him slightly, but he sees the recently retired as free workers,
right?
and sort of buttonholes them to sort of get 1 to 3 days a week commitment for them for 5 years, and so you're retired, you've got skills, you've got time on your hands. Give me days so that we can do ministry. And I think maybe there is something in that. And particularly with some people, with see, I'm never going to retire. I'm from that generation. We're just going to go. We're just going to die. But for the rest of you, it's there's taking retirement often way before 65, and you've got time and money and just luxuries which actually a lot of other people don't have.
No,
he's clearly a young man who doesn't understand
no. He'll learn
this business
I've only just started getting a pension. I'm quite excited about this.
Part of the challenge is helping people feel that they've got gifts to give them.
Yes.
So we find with some of our older folks,
yes.
because society sees age as we're very much prejudiced towards the young. He says having turned 40, you get that. And we have a number of folks who will say, well, I'm old now, I can't do that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? You've got phenomenal gifts. You know what? Why don't you meet with sunset? We've got a lady who recently retired she's amazing at photography. So what she's done is deliberately say to young families, can I come around to your house? We'll do some family portraits for you. And she meets them, they go for walks and in beautiful woods. And she's lovely. Her gift is photography. She's got other gifts as well, but she really uses that to help families feel valued and loved, and children feel valued and loved. And that's lovely to watch that. And then, all the kids will come in on a Sunday morning, and they know her, and they've spent time with her. They've been to house and played with the toys and the budgie, and they will. And she's kind of become almost the church grandma to loads of kids who their grandparents live a distance away. If for some of the mums, if they've got hospital appointments, they will ring her, and she will have their kids for the morning. And that's a lovely way she's using her gifts as well as other ways in church, and it's lovely watching that. And on Sundays, we always put 2 questions up for discussion, and it's lovely watching some of the older gentlemen who've got 50, 60 years of experience of walking with Christ, sitting with some of the young guys who've been Christians for 1 or 2 years, and just chatting and asking questions and sharing their wisdom.
That's very helpful, because I know sometimes old people I know, actually they lack a lot of confidence. The way they were brought up at school is you learnt by being quiet, and you did as you were told. That generation they weren't used to having their own voice being heard, and many of them, if you're not careful, you misinterpret them as like they want to be lazy, or they want to keep themselves to themselves. Actually, a lot of them just lack confidence. That self-assertion wasn't even in the vocabulary when they were growing up. So they feel very inadequate, actually, and many of them too. For all those years of Christian living, they're quite frightened about the future. They're quite frightened about what's going to happen to this country, what's going to happen to my kids, what's going to happen to my and what's going to happen to the church, and what's going to happen to me.
I find though that when you look at church and a lot of sort of outreach ministries that go on in church life, that actually, if it wasn't for the relatively recently retired, so much wouldn't happen. From toddler groups to a cafe to some of the maintenance in the church building, the accounts. So much of that stuff is actually driven by people who've recently retired, and are actually giving that time to helping support the church and advance the work. And actually, they're invaluable and definitely needed.
No, very helpful.